Everybody at home, like to reintroduce Professor Ian Lee. You guys all know how famous he is, and he's back. And the topic of the day is going to be tariffs. So back to Ian. Ian, I want to tell you. I don't think you just found out 5 minutes ago, but you're very famous. You have millions and millions of views on our social media. So I want to let you know you just found out minutes ago.
I did.
And it's amazing.
Crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah.
It is crazy.
And today, which is going to be a fun topic, is tariffs. And the whole world's talking about it.
Oh God, yes.
There's tariffs, and everyone's being put on the chopping block.
Yeah.
Every country got put on the chopping block, and especially the worst part is that we are neighbors with the country that's putting everyone on the chopping block. So it kind of feels like it was a plan all along.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, it's during our election year, which is even harder or stranger times in Canada. People don't realize that. The other countries don't realize that, but it's our election year. So
Yes.
it's a little bit of a wild card or a wrench in the in our system.
It is.
And also, I wanted to mention that we were already sort of like in a tough spot. Like our economy was already in a tough spot.
Very much.
And now that we have these tariffs, and with our biggest trading partner by a long shot, I want to know what you think about the tariffs now. What do you think about? Because we do have a lot of, introduce yourself. If you can please introduce yourself so everyone knows your background, and then we'll jump right in.
And I have very clear views on this. I was 9 years in banking here in Ottawa, in Eastern Ontario, in my 20s. And I was 4.5 years at Avco Finance, where I started as a trainee and learned all about credit and collections. And we did a lot of second mortgages to the banks.
Yep.
They did the first, we did the second, often lending down payment to people who didn't have down payment.
Some private lending. Yeah.
And we did a lot of down payments for car loans to young guys that couldn't get the down payment. And so I did that for 4.5 years, worked up to branch manager, and then I was recruited by Bank of Montreal, main office branch, right beside Parliament Hill. And I was there for 4.5 years. And I started as a loan officer, then a loan manager, then a mortgage manager, then commercial credit lending to SMEs. So I was 9 years in the two companies, and they trained the dickens out of me like they did everybody else.
Yeah, banks have good training.
The training was superb. They taught me how to read a balance sheet and an income statement, and taught me about credit and collections and evaluating business plans from entrepreneurs coming in, to get a business loan, and I did all that. And anyways, I was loving it. I was in my 20s. I was single. I was footloose and fancy free, as they say, and life was a beach. And then I was getting promoted steadily and making money, and that made me happy. And then they called me in one day and said, we're very happy with you. We have great news. We're promoting you again. I said, great. That's, I get more money.
Yeah, of
right?
course. Promotion
this is
comes with
great.
more money, yeah.
They said, yes, you're going to first Canadian place in downtown Toronto. And my face fell to the floor, and I must have looked like I'd just been hit by a lightning bolt or something. I'm one of those Canadians who is very anti-Toronto.
Yes.
When I say anti, I don't hate Toronto. It's just I knew I was never going to live there. Never. And so I
It's not for everyone.
It's not for everyone.
It's a very big city.
Oh. Then it was big. It's even larger now, but too big, too fast, too everything. So I said to them, I said, that's a fate worse than death. I just blurted that out. I was 28. And they were very good to me, very good to all of us. I mean, if you had a good career, a good record, which I did, they didn't fire you, but they told you, you're frozen. You're not going to ever, go anywhere from there. So I just finished up my whole undergraduate degree part-time, 10 years at night, and going to school. And so I decided, because I didn't have any commitments, and I applied for a master's degree in public policy. First off, there were no MBAs in Ottawa at the time. Secondly, I know this is going to sound arrogant, but I wouldn't have done an MBA if there had been one, because I figured I knew more than any business school professor because of all my phenomenal experience and training. Because real world, working in a bank and credit and collections.
On the field.
Yeah, in the field. Let me tell you, you'll learn more than you'll ever learn in a BCom. And that's not to put down BComs. It's just the training you get there. And it's a window on the whole market economy in a bank, because everybody deals with a bank. So, but I realized there at main office, where I had a third of Pierre Trudeau's cabinet ministers on my books as customers. I had the ambassador from the Soviet Union as a client. I had the ambassador.
Which doesn't exist anymore.
No, it doesn't exist. I had the ambassador from the People's Republic of China. I had the ambassador from the Embassy of Egypt. I had NGOs. I had, it was called the Native Indian Brotherhood. That was what it was actually called. Now they renamed themselves several times. That's now the Assembly of First Nations. Oh, wow. They were my customer. Yeah. And so I realized that I didn't know anything about public policy and how governments work. So I became more and more curious because I had all these deputy ministers on my books and senators and then, the whole bit. So when I decided I was going to leave the bank, I decided to do a master's in public policy, and I never regretted it, by the way. And so I did extremely well. And so a couple of profs said, well, why don't you apply for a PhD? And I said, no, I can't afford it, 4.5 years, 5 years, and, I just don't have that kind of money, blah, blah, blah. And they don't we'll pay you. We'll give you grants.
That's good.
I was so naive, I didn't have a clue. I said, you mean they're going to pay me to sit there and go to school and read books? And they said, yes. I said, okay, sign me up.
Yeah, of course.
So anyways, I did my PhD. And then I graduated, and then I started right away in the Sprott School because the director wanted to hire me very badly. One of the dark and dirty secrets that many business people may not realize is that in every business school across Canada and the United States, there's been surveys done. 2/3 of all the professors have never worked in business. Harvard Business School did a survey of all the business schools in the States. Most professors in most business schools have never worked in business.
Yeah.
And because they're doing, undergrad, high school, undergrad, master's, PhD, and into the teaching. So they wanted to get this director at the time of the business school wanted to get somebody that had business experience, and he heard about me over the grapevine because I was at the same university in a different department. And so he looked me up, tracked me down, said, I want you to teach a course. I did. I got spectacular teaching evaluations. Then he said, well, come back and I want you to teach one more year on a contract as a probation, see what you're like. So I did very well. And then they said, okay, we want to hire you on a permanent basis. So they did. And then the wall came down a year after that. And that was transformative. The Berlin Wall came down. I mean, communism was collapsing. And it just
great time to see that.
It was an incredible time. And then we got a grant from the government of Canada to set up a business school at Warsaw. It was the first business school in OECD country to set up a business school in the former communist system. So we set up in Warsaw, Poland, and I was the first person to go in there in March of 1991. And I'm telling you, Danny, it was an eye-opener. I thought I'd been to Europe, I'd been to Paris, I'd been to London, I'd been before to Western places, Western cities in Western Europe. So I thought I was an experienced traveler, right? I had never experienced culture shock because the cities of Western Europe are, they're old, but they're a high standard of living like Canada, right? I went in, I couldn't believe it. There were no stores of any kind that we could recognize. There was no Western stores, no Western restaurants, no Western anything. The hotels were disgusting. The food was disgusting. I really mean it. And I was in culture shock. I wanted to go home right away. I said, I can't stand this. So anyways, the guy, my counterpart, said, no, you can't come home because you're teaching a class tomorrow morning to Solidarity, the managers of Solidarity. So anyways, I got over it, and then I started applying to other MBA programs that had been set up by the Americans through USAID. That's the agency that Donald Trump just shut down. And and so I ended up teaching a whole smash of times. I taught in Moscow, I taught in Kyiv, Ukraine many times, taught in Prague 10 times, taught in Bucharest, Romania, and it was, I am telling you, it was an eye-opener, unbelievable education for me because it really confirmed views I had developed in the bank in 9 years. I really do believe in capitalism.
Capitalism, yeah, it's the way to.
It's the way out. The only people I think that can believe in sort of socialism or centrally planned economies are people that have never lived in one or experienced it. So
yeah, I'm a big believer in capitalism. I do believe safety net for sure, the unfortunate.
But the idea, and we'll come to this shortly. I mean, the idea that government should be determining what sectors are going to grow, I think is nonsense. Mm-hmm. Or that the government should dictate who will innovate, or determining battery plants. I mean, this is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. The role of the government is to act as the referee of the hockey game, mm-hmm. and they should not be telling Sidney Crosby when to shoot the puck. They shouldn't own the hockey team. They shouldn't be government corporations because and it's not that I'm being anti-public servant. My father was a public servant for 40 years. Mm-hmm. But The idea that public servants or ministers know more about your industry than you know about your industry is silly.
No way.
And yet there's Minister Sean Pine, and I respect him, but saying we're going to subsidize and determine the battery plants. Well, they're not in the car industry. They're not car guys.
No.
Just like criticizing Loblaws in the grocery store, what they were doing, with groceries. Well, the bureaucrats and the politicians have never run a grocery store in their life. No. So why would they shouldn't be? You set the broad rules. And then you say, okay, you're the referee, the government's the referee, so we will call out players that cheat. Just like in a hockey game, somebody trips or hooks, you penalize them.
Of course.
But it's not the role of government to dictate where the economy is going.
Yep.
And so we can talk about that after. I'm very, we have a huge problem in Canada. We have many structural deficiencies. Productivity is collapsing. It's down to about 50% of the U.S. And so we need a lot of reforms in our country dealing, with these sorts of things that are being discussed right now in the election campaign.
I mean, productivity, so people understand at home, is that we're not producing anything. We're not producing and selling. We're not producing and making money. We're just basically, or services, example. We're not producing or giving services, but we're just basically, what is it? What is the stats? One out of every 5 employees is like a government employee? Is that what it is? A public servant?
We're about 4 million out of 20 million. And this is StatsCan data. 4 million people are employed in federal, provincial, municipal governments. That's not hospitals, which are government.
That's true.
And that's not universities, which are basically government. We don't like to say that.
Yes.
But we're not private for-profit organizations. No. So if you throw in education and healthcare, it's actually a lot more than 4 million.
Yes.
Okay? The presence of the public sector in Canada is about 45% of GDP. That's almost half.
That doesn't make sense, no?
It's huge. It's huge.
Especially for a country like Canada has so much resources and so much minerals.
This is one of the things we need to be doing is reorienting. I mean, the United States is so dynamic, as we know. It is so innovative, and they have a very, very aggressive private sector. And they're much more willing to take risk. And we in Canada have all kinds of problems because we've got so much protectionism. And I'm a real critic. Well, this is leading us towards tariffs in a moment.
Yes.
The reason I'm so anti-protectionism is I've seen this over and over. I saw it in Eastern Europe when I was teaching there. I saw it in the bank. When a company, and this is a good economic theory too by Schumpeter, a very famous economist. When a company feels pressure from a competitor, what do? Well, they innovate.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean doing an R&D to build a new computer. You can innovate in the services sector by changing your hours of operation, or if you're a restaurant, you change the menu. That's innovation.
Yeah.
But the point is, you start to hustle. When you feel threatened competitively because there's some other companies taking customers from you, taking your market share, you're going to run harder. Mm-hmm. You're going to be more edgy. You're going to be more creative. When you protect an industry and say, we protect, for example, the supply management. So we say, well, the Americans, we won't let them come in and sell the, butter and margarine and dairy and so forth. So then they don't innovate. And what do? They increase the prices. Same with telecom. The act prohibits foreign telecom companies from coming to Canada. So what does the big three do? And I'm talking Bell, Rogers, and TELUS.
Most expensive phone bills in the world. Yeah.
In other words, what they do is they take their little monopoly and they put the prices up.
Yeah, they all call each other and they tell each other what they're going to charge, and then they have the phone, we all pay it.
And so it is.
No choice.
That's why protectionism is so pernicious. That's why tariffs are so pernicious. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about Trump in a second. But I have supported every free trade agreement from 1988 until now. I'm talking the FTA in '88, NAFTA in '93, CETA for Europe, the European Free Trade, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because every one of those free trade agreements does what? It reduces the tariffs. It takes the tariffs away. And so a free trade agreement is the opposite of tariffs. Mm-hmm. And I find it really amusing listening to these people coming out now today, and they're all against, Trump and tariffs. And I mean, lots of professors are coming out. These same people were against free trade agreements for the last 35 years, and now all of a sudden they've become free traders, which is quite amusing.
It's kind of funny, but just so like the viewers at home, some people explain what tariffs are and who pays it, because a lot of people don't understand how it works. They think that we are being taxed, but that's not how it works. It's the person receiving it. So like at the border when it comes in, there's a
CBSA. It's CBSA imposes the tax on it. That's right. And just to be clear, remember, Trump is imposing tariffs, okay?
Yes.
He's imposing them on Americans.
Yes.
On Canadian goods going into the States. We are doing retaliatory tariffs. Those retaliatory tariffs it's a tax, number one. Number two, it's on Canadians.
Yes.
Okay, the retaliatory tariff is on American goods coming into Canada. So the CBSA, because everything comes through the border, and the importers declare it on their manifest, their bill of lading. That's actually what it's called. Right?
I got 10 T-shirts at $10 each.
Exactly.
And then I have a 20% tariffs. That's $2 extra each T-shirt.
So the truck is filled up with stuff.
Yep.
Could be computers, could be T-shirts, could be whatever. And there's a bill of lading for every one of those trucks that come through, and then they declare it to the CBSA at the border. Yes. And at the bridges or wherever the border is. And then the CBSA agent evaluates it to determine whether it's subject to a tariff, and if it is, what amount and how much. And then that's levied on the importer into Canada, which is a Canadian company.
The Canadian company, yes.
And they pass it on to the retailer, because most of this stuff is going to retail.
Yes.
So then the retailer pays it, and then they embed it into the price. So it pushes up, tariffs push up the price of the product.
Yes.
It is basically a tax on the people.
Yes.
So it slows down growth, and it reduces, it increases the price. It can lead to unemployment, especially if the tariffs are on the American side. That can create unemployment on our side, because if the Canadian companies are no longer able to sell into the States because of the American side tariffs, then they lay off workers. So tariffs, this has been studied to death since Adam Smith, for God's sake, 250 years ago. And there is no positive benefits from tariffs. None. In fact, the Bank of Canada has done a big study on this. It raises inflation. It causes unemployment to go up. It causes growth to go down. It makes the deficits go up because they have to pay for people who've gone on unemployment insurance because they've lost their jobs. So
it hurts everywhere.
It hurts everywhere, everywhere. It is just a dumb tax. It's just crazy.
And so that's for the viewers at home, so they understand what tariffs are. So it's the person that receives the product that pays for the tariff. So if you're the Canadian receiving that T-shirt, let's say the $10 T-shirt, buying it, the $2, the 20% on that $10 T-shirt is $2. So now that's a $12 total T-shirt.
That's right.
So it's the person receiving it. So because people think that it sounds like the opposite, right? They're saying, oh, he's taxed. Like they will say, Trump is taxing us. Indirectly, you can say that, but what it is that it's the American that's receiving the product that has to pay more.
They're paying the tax.
They're paying the tax.
And in the other way around, we, the Canadian people, are paying the tax that we think,
a retaliation.
May sound like Trump's paying the tax to the Americans. They aren't. The Canadian government is saying, we're mad at Donald Trump, so we're going to put a retaliatory tariff on the Canadian people.
Yes.
So when you hear of $150 billion of retaliatory tariffs, that's on us.
Yeah, added to the tax we already had. Yes.
This is crazy.
Why do we have to do that? We didn't have to do that retaliatory tax.
I am so opposed to retaliatory tariff. I really am.
Yeah, that was not a good idea.
And by the way, not all countries are doing it. I was just looking this up for a conversation, and there's about 10 countries who have decided as their policy not to go retaliatory. One of them's Australia, and another's Mexico. They've said, no, we're going to deal with Trump in other ways, but we're not going to tax our own people with retaliatory tariffs. There's about 10 countries now, and because those countries realize how destructive it is. It's very pernicious. It's really destructive. It's just a dumb thing to do.
Oh yeah,
and there's lots of things, and I hope we have time to talk about it. There's lots of things we ought to be doing and should be doing, but not retaliatory taxes. No. Retaliatory tariffs.
And another thing that's so now speaking about politics, another thing is that right now we're in the middle of our elections, and we have our new Prime Minister, Carney, who is really buddy with Europe. Who's friends with Europe. He says every picture up is a friend with Macron or whatever. It's somebody in Europe, right? He's good friends with everybody. So he is bringing the whole, and he's a businessman. He ran Bank of Canada, or he ran Bank of England.
Yeah.
He he's a banker as well.
Yes.
So right now he's saying what people want to hear, but sometimes people don't know the numbers. So what is our trade in a year with Europe, example?
Infinitesimally tiny.
Yeah, isn't it like less than 1%? I thought I saw
think
something
it's
like
less than
0.5%.
I know the American numbers much more because
Yes.
they're so huge. We do $1 trillion a year both ways, Canada and U.S.
Yes.
$1 trillion.
Yes.
We're a 2.5 trillion economy. So these are staggering numbers.
Yes.
Now this is imports from the American country into Canada and Canadian exports into the U.S. It's oil. We export a ton of oil and natural gas to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And then we import all kinds of things, John Deere tractors and laptops and
Steel.
Steel.
Which is very hard to put on a boat and bring it to Europe.
And so when Carney says, okay, we're going to pivot to Europe, implying, he never talks about these numbers, of course. Well, we have $1 trillion of trade with the U.S. So it's almost as if he's saying, we're going to take that $1 trillion and somehow, I'm being sarcastic, okay, put it on a boat or an airplane and ship it over. Well, that $1 trillion is thousands of companies on both sides of the border trading, because trade is micro, not macro. This is my criticism of liberals. And this is a very important point. You listen to every one of them. Got to pivot to Europe. Got to pivot to Asia. You know,
No chance.
But the larger point is,
From 1 to 2%, maybe double it.
I agree with you, but the larger point is, it's not the prime minister who decides you're trading. It's each company inside the company managing their value chain and their supply chain.
Yes.
In other words, trade is micro, not macro. Micro meaning the firm, the individual company. They have a VP of supply chain management or something like that, or procurement, okay? And that person is scouring the world looking for, raw material inputs to bring into the business to produce whatever they're producing.
Especially because they're our neighbor, we should have maybe repaired that relationship as soon as possible.
That's exactly
continue
where I'm
doing
going.
business back and forth.
Exactly.
Because it's an hour away from here. Like every major city in Canada, it's probably an hour away from the border.
90% of Canadians live within 100 kilometers of the U.S. border, which is an hour basically.
Yeah.
And the idea that we're somehow going to go 10,000 kilometers across the ocean, and if you go the other ocean, called the Pacific, on the other side, they don't even speak English.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, and I'm not saying it's wrong to speak another language.
But there's also
saying
more manufacturing that way.
There's
China is that way.
there's a whole bunch of problems. Number one, it's 10,000 kilometers, 15,000. Well, it's 15,000
On expensive boats.
On expensive boats. Secondly, our business class mostly speaks English.
Yes.
It's the English, the language of Canada and the United States.
Yep.
And so to go across the ocean 15,000 kilometers as opposed to going down the road for 100 kilometers, first off, the costs are staggering. Different time zones, very different laws over there from here, whereas the Canadian and the American laws have integrated over the years, and they're English common law anyway, so there's a lot of similarities between the two. We share the same time zones, because it's north-south,
Yes.
right? And we speak English, and we have similar legal systems, and we're an hour away, or an hour and a half away. And so I'm not saying don't diversify. I believe in diversification of trade too. But the idea that we're no longer going to be dealing with the largest economy in the world, there's not a snowball's chance in hell. Because we have 250 years of geography, 250 years of history with the United States, going back to, the Americans, the founding of the United States. And we've got 8,800 kilometers of geography. That's the length of the two borders, or the one border, I should say, of the two countries.
Yeah.
And so, there's such natural advantages to trading and doing business with the States. I think at the margin, at the edge, we can, increase our relationship with Asia and Europe. Maybe 5%. Maybe we can bring America from 75% of all of our trade down to 70%. But that leads to our next point, Danny, and this is even more important. When Carney and others talk about, we're going to pivot to Europe, they never talk about what we're pivoting, okay? But we do know that the Liberal Party for years, for certainly the last 9 years under Trudeau, was very anti-resource development. So they said no pipeline bill, the tanker ban bill on the West Coast. The tankers were not going to be allowed. The carbon tax, caps on oil and gas production, a whole bunch of restrictions on natural resources, okay? Okay, it's clear they don't want them developed, okay? I mean, I don't agree, but...
Yeah, they killed the last pipeline, right? That was going to, beside Vancouver, and it was going to the U.S.
That was going to be the one and the only. Right. So what I'm saying is, when they talk about pivoting, they're not saying this, but it's very clear that they have in their head the vision that we're going to start exporting manufactured goods to Europe. This is preposterous.
Like their cars.
Cars. If you study Europe, and you know Europe, I know Europe, first off, they don't drive F-150 trucks in Europe. They drive little tiny Fiats.
Yes.
We don't make little tiny Fiats in Canada. We make big honking trucks, okay? Toyota, huge vans. I mean, we make big bloody cars and SUVs and Jeeps and so forth. Europe doesn't want that. Number two, Europe is notorious for protecting their market manufacturing to keep out manufacturers trying to get in. So you say, well, then we'll pivot to Asia. Well, Asia's the same thing. China is as protected or more protected than is Europe. And they're a manufacturing powerhouse too. They're not going to allow our manufactured goods in there. No. So, that brings us back to square one. Look, there's three things in our economy. We got services, which is the largest part. 85% of our whole economy is services. Anybody who works in a tall building and sits at a computer all day, you're in the services sector. That's the way I tell my students. When they say, "Oh, I'm not sure what services means." Some people say it means McDonald's. No. If you're sitting in front of a computer in a tall building, you're in the services sector. You're not growing potatoes there, and you're not building tractors on a production line. No. Okay? Which is like almost all of us.
Yes.
Okay, so manufacturing is down to 10% of GDP in Canada. It shrunk from a third of GDP back in the 70s down to 10%. So it is not our future. It's our past. And so it's very difficult to export services. You can do it if you have a very strong tech sector, because tech is services, right? But we don't. So we're not going to be exporting services to do the pivot. We're not exporting cars. So what is left? Resources,
and minerals.
Energy, oil.
They all want our energy. By the way, all the countries and all the continents want our energy.
Want our energy.
Yep.
In fact, there was an op-ed in the Globe and Mail last week, and it was an analyst from one of the German think tanks. He says, "Look, Canada," I laughed when I read it. He says, "We don't want your cars." He says, "We want your resources."
Yes. I think Germany banged on our door and begged us for our energy, and we said, "Sorry, we can't." I think as one of the provinces said,
Quebec.
No, Quebec. Yeah, it said no, and then we had to, and we knew we couldn't even build a case study towards it. We're like, it was such a hard conversation, but Germany was begging for it because they knew they didn't want to just rely on Russia, so they wanted to.
And here, let me tell you something else, because most people don't realize this, because most people, the stereotype has emerged that Canada is this sort of dirty country because we have oil and gas, right? Our coal consumption as a percentage of total energy in the country, because this is data coming out of the StatsCan, is 4%. We've got coal down, so coal is a very tiny source of energy in Canada. In other words, we've almost completely got off coal. And coal is the dirtiest of all the fuels. Germany sources 20%. And yet Germany has the reputation of being clean and green.
Yes.
It's a load of crap.
Yeah, it's a load of crap.
They're 20% coal. We're 4%.
Yeah.
That's why they want our natural gas, because it's much cleaner and they want to get off dirty coal.
Yes.
The same with the Chinese. And
I think Chinese opens up a coal mine every week or something.
I've read the same for
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And 60% of all their energy consumed in China is coal.
Yes.
In fact, they're the number one emitter in the world at 30% of total world emissions is one country called China.
But they don't have to pay that tax.
No, they don't. No, they don't. They're not going to do that to themselves, are they?
No, they're not going to pay that tax. We just pay taxes everywhere. We got so many taxes.
I know.
And now this new tariff one that you got added.
So there's Carney saying we're going to pivot. Okay. I mean, pivot's a bit strong. I mean, if he said we're going to try and diversify.
Diversify makes more sense. Yeah.
But I like that phrase. Pivot implies we're just throwing out the American completely, the trading relationship. But the second thing is, he hasn't come clean with everybody and says, look, people, the only thing we can export to pivot to expand or diversify our trade are resources.
Yes.
We're not going to sell them cars, and we don't have any really very much services to sell them. So what we're left with is resources, of which we have enormous amounts of resources. And the world wants our resources. You know, they want our timber.
Oh, yes.
They want our potash. They want our nuclear, the fuel for the nuclear power reactors. You know, they want our food. I mean, Western Canada is a powerhouse,
Yes.
you know, in wheats and grains and the Eastern Coast and seafood. So, you know, this idea
It's
that
true. We have a big fishing industry too.
it's
Yeah.
very large.
Yes.
And so we have opportunities, and the world wants it. We got critical minerals, my God.
Yes.
And yet our policy framework in our country for years has diminished the resource sector. They put it down, said, you know, it's low tech, it's dirty, it's the old economy. And this isn't true. If you look at the resource sector, I would argue it's much more high-tech than manufacturing. They're using cutting-edge drones,
Yes.
surveillance satellites up in the sky.
Yes.
They use these engineers that go in and do these sophisticated soil sample testing.
Yes.
And then they got these very high-tech pipelines, and they got very high-tech
Labs to
labs
test them,
and,
yes.
and the extraction.
It's true. They're all wearing lab coats when they show up on site to test something.
So, you know, this stereotype that the Liberals are feasting on or trafficking on is low tech is old and cheap and dirty. And actually, it's exactly the opposite. It's high tech, it's capital intensive, and it's becoming more and more sophisticated, and it's becoming cleaner and cleaner. And we've got enormous amounts. The critical minerals are essential to the green revolution. And we are I believe we're in the top 5 in the world for critical minerals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're in the top 5 for oil and gas. We're in the top, I believe, 4 or 5 for gold. We have minerals coming at our yin-yang. And here we are trying to block or slow down or diminish our reliance on natural resources. The last 9 years has been a huge mistake.
I'll bet you as much money as you want that every Canadian would invest in our energy sector if you said, hey, we're going to open up one of these two. Okay, let's say energy and minerals versus our manufacturing and tech. If you put those two versus those two, and you said, hey, Canadians, you guys can invest. We'll match it. Let's say let's say the government says we match your investment if you invest in one of these two. We want to open it up.
Yeah.
Every Canadian, I swear, would choose the minerals and the energy because they know what we have. They all know.
We know
They're
what
born. They know. Any Canadian born here knows what we have in the ground.
Yes.
And it's our land. Our land is
Of course.
awesome.
Of course.
So I like that's why people kind of like are amazed how it's kind of broken here.
And the other thing, people don't realize this. I mean, I didn't realize it until I read the study. There was a study done about 10 years ago by Professor Stephen Gordon at Laval University. And this study was, when I say duplicated, it was a similar study was done just last year by Professor Tombe at University of Calgary. I was stunned the first time I read it. They said in the last quarter century, almost all of the increase in our standard of living in Canada was due to the export of natural resources.
Yes, of course.
It has a very high margin. To use
Very
the
high
language
margin,
of business,
yes.
there's a very good profit
It's
margin.
all profit. You take it out of the ground and you sell it
and
for
billions,
money. Yeah.
billions flow into the Alberta and Saskatchewan treasuries and the government of Canada to pay for, guess what, healthcare and all the other goodies that we want. So here we've got these resources, and that's just oil and gas.
That's without the dams.
We haven't even talked about the critical minerals yet.
Oh, that too, yeah.
I mean, I was on the website. Listen to this. This one just blew me over. At the website of Natural Resources Canada, the government. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it has the Liberal cabinet minister right now. It's Wilkinson. Okay? And there is, on the website, it says there are over 500 projects, 475 projects, resource projects, waiting for approval in this country, totaling over $500 billion.
Wow.
Can you imagine? And this is in a time when the government was trying to discourage resource projects. Can you imagine if a government said, we've changed completely, we are going to open the jets for resource development? That $500 billion would expand, I'm sure, to $1 trillion. Why? Because people around the world know we've got resources that most countries don't have. I mean, only a small handful of countries have critical minerals. There are only about 10 countries in the world that have significant oil reserves. Significant. Obviously Saudi Arabia, obviously the US, Russia, and us.
Sure.
Okay. And so the contributions to our prosperity are staggering. I mean, staggering. And here we've been doing for the last 9 years, trying to block and restrict and prevent the development, exploitation, and export of natural resources. We should be saying, I'm not trying to say we're going to stop being a services economy. Of course not. I mean, 80% of us or 85% of us work in the services sector. I'm in services and education.
I'm in services.
You're in services and financial services. I mean, almost all of us. It's only a small number. And manufacturing has become heavily automated. That's the other thing. And so has, by the way, minerals and mining. They've got more and more automation in that industry, you know, things that cut down the trees, robots, cutters. And so my point is, I'm not suggesting this is going to employ gazillions of people. What I am saying is the resource sector is going to contribute mightily to our standard of living, because we can charge top prices to the world, and the world will pay for it. They want our gold. They want our nickel. They want our aluminum. They want our potash. I mean, there's about 25 critical minerals.
It all double in price. Everything that we're talking about just doubled in price in the last 5 years.
That's my point.
So
and it's scarce. And we've got enormous amounts. I mean, literally in the top 3 countries or 4 countries in the world in most of these critical minerals. And so, and the country is the second largest geographic entity in the world, not largest economic entity. We're only 10th or 11th in terms of GDP. But in terms of hectares and resources, we're right behind Russia.
Yep.
Russia's the largest country in the world geographically, not GDP. And
we're better located.
Not only are we better located, but there's first off, there's a big, as we know, there's an embargo on Russia, and secondly, there's tons, and I've been to Russia. Okay, I've taught there, and it is a very deeply corrupt country.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying that companies won't go into a corrupt country if there's opportunities there to make money, but I really deeply believe, if you look at talk to energy companies or resource companies, and say, okay, if you have a choice to be going into Russia and going to Canada to develop the same critical minerals, which country do you think they would choose? Well, they're going to choose Canada.
Of course.
Why?
Their patents protected.
It's you're not going to get knocked off. There's assassinations in Russia. There's tremendous kickbacks, tremendous corruption, and you've got to pay. And
it's like the five-family mafia family.
And it is illegal under Canadian law.
Yes.
So you can say, okay, I'm going to hide it. That's exactly what they did in that Montreal company, that engineering company, Lavalin, and they hid it. and They got caught.
Yep.
And a couple of them went to jail. Not good for your CV, by the way.
No.
So,
it's weird, but it's almost like every government is kind of corrupted, and then some are just way worse. Yeah, some are just way worse than others.
Yeah, Russia's very bad. Russia's very
and
bad.
Like us, I don't know. They'll have like a $40 orange juice or something.
Yeah,
but over there, it's sort of like
yes.
No, now the president or whoever will own like. A province or something.
Yes. And so my point is that foreign capital, and we've always built this country with foreign capital because we're a small country people-wise. Yes. We've only got 40 million people right now. Smaller than this, it's incredible, smaller than California. The population of Canada is smaller than the population of California. So my point is we are a small country economically, we're a small country population, but we're a huge country geographically. And so we've always depended on foreign capital to develop it, okay? The CPR was built with foreign capital.
Which is a great thing to have.
Which
foreign
is a great
capital,
thing to have. It's great for the economy. And so where I'm going with this is if we decided to change our whole policy framework and got rid of that no pipeline bill, tanker ban bill, Bill C-69 that throws huge amounts of red tape in front of projects.
Yes, so annoying.
If we got rid of all that and the word went out, hey, we welcome foreign capital investment in the resource sector, I believe that they would flood into Canada way before they'd want to go into Russia because of all these are barriers basically. When you have to pay off all kinds of mafiosa types, that's a barrier to entry.
Yes.
It's actually sort of like a tariff.
Yes.
I mean, in a weird way.
It's a tax.
It's a tax on the capital investment.
Yeah.
And
then it's hard to tell your investors, hey, we have to leave a little bit we have to have extra money. They're like, why?
Especially when it's illegal.
Off the books money. They're like,
especially because
no one's going to invest
law
there.
on the books of the United States. It was the first country in the world to pass this law like 25 years ago. It is illegal for any American corporation to pay a bribe abroad outside of the United States. I don't know if you know that.
Oh.
This law was very radical. Nobody copied it for the longest time. And then we passed a very similar law. I can't remember now, was it 5, 6, 7 years ago? It was not yesterday morning, but it was relatively recently. And it is illegal, criminally illegal to pay a bribe. You can't use the defense, well, I didn't do it in Canada. I did it in,
Czech, whatever.
Yeah, or in Bangladesh, or I did it in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
That's not a defense.
No.
Extraterritorial. This law is what they call extraterritorial. The Canadian law and the American law applies to Canadians abroad throughout the world. So my point is, it's very high risk going into these countries that are deeply corrupt, where you got to pay bribes. I've said this to my own students, because some of them are going to international business. And I said, listen, I'm not trying to sound like a Boy Scout or a religious person saying, be good,
just don't be
say
surprised.
your prayers. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, I say to them, one day when you get out there and you're successful and you're an international, working maybe for a Canadian company abroad, you're going to be confronted with this situation, because that's the nature of a lot of countries in the third world, in the developing world, because I've seen the data from Transparency International, which is a body in Berlin, and they rank all the countries of the world in corruption. It's a fascinating list, by the way.
I want to check it out.
It's at transparency.org is the website.
Yes.
And they have this list every year. It's called the Corruption Perceptions Index. And they developed a complex methodology, and it's funded by the UN, by the way. And they rank all the countries in the world. So who's at the top of the list for being clean? We know that. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Switzerland, all the European countries. Canada's 16. I think the U.S. is 19.
Is U.S. up there? Yeah.
The top 35 countries are the rich countries. Okay.
Yes.
But then what's much more interesting on this list is to go look at the bottom third. Kazakhstan, and Somalia.
Yeah,
and Russia.
All the stands, probably.
All the stands.
Yeah, all the stands.
Unbelievably corrupt.
Yeah,
okay?
all the stands for sure.
And so coming back to my story to the students, I said, listen, I'm not trying to sound preachy and saying, I'm a Boy Scout. I'm just saying, think of your own career. You go abroad. And
your CV and your jail time.
You're rising up through the hierarchy, and you become the VP of development, business development in Central Asia and the stands. And you start talking to them, and they say, well, yes, we want you to come in, but you got to pay this guy $1 million, and you got to pay this guy and this guy, and they give you the list of all the bribes that have to be paid. And I said to my students, think about this. If Canada finds out, and you can say they'll never find out, well, that's what Lavalin said, and they got caught. Mm-hmm. And it destroyed Lavalin. I had to rename the company. Mm-hmm. And they had to pay all kinds of fines, and they were banned from World Bank contracting. And I mean, it was really bad. And of course, the people that were caught up in it, the actual employees, they got fired, and their reputations are ruined. Okay? And one of them, I know at least one did go to jail.
Yep.
And so I'm not trying to be Boy Scout. I'm just saying doing business in the developing world is very fraught with risk. And one of the risks is you're going to have to bribe somebody. And if you bribe somebody, you're breaking Canadian criminal law, and you don't want to go to jail. And so I'm saying it's a lot easier to do business in Canada or the United States than it is to do business in Russia.
Yes.
And so if we could get rid of these laws that inhibit or prevent or slow down or restrict development of resources in Canada, and we put the green light on instead of the yellow light or the red light, we could have billions, hundreds of billions of dollars coming into this country. Mm-hmm. I mean, we could increase our standard of living enormously.
And all that would be is, it's not that we have to do anything. We have to stop doing things.
That's right.
It's not that we have to do anything. It's just, can you guys cut some red tape out?
Yeah.
Actually, no, put a pause. You guys have red tape. Give the capitalists a year just to get all these contracts signed, and you'll see the whole world will change.
And Danny, I'm not one of these people saying, well, the government's got to go in and do this and this and that. No. I want the government to get out of the way.
Yeah, don't do anything. Keep your check.
Yeah, get rid of all these inhibitions and blockages and red tape, etc., and then stand back and let the private sector do the developing. They will fund it. Mm. They will provide the capital. They'll provide the expertise. And that's how we've run this country forever. That's how we built housing for 150 years in this country.
I'm not saying fire anybody. Just it's almost like a lot of the government employees have the mafia has jobs, it's like the mafia job. They put someone on a construction site just getting a check but not doing anything. Mm-hmm. I don't even care if you do that with your government employees. Just keep them there. I don't care if they're getting checks. Just let the capitalists come in, do the business they're supposed to be doing, because there is so much money to be made for the whole country. Yeah. And we could do this as a co-op. Give them half, whatever it is.
But I'll even go further. The idea that people sitting on Queen Street, which is where the Department of Industry is, it's the old Industry Canada, they have another acronym, but it's the same. It's the Department of Industry. The idea that bureaucrats, and I know some of them, and they're nice people. They're nice people.
Never run a business.
Okay, but they've never worked in business. They're public bureaucrats. Okay, but the idea that they know more about how to develop resources or run an airline or run a grocery store chain or run a nickel company
or raise money
is just preposterous silliness. They don't. That's not their job. They don't have any competencies, and they're not using. Here's the other damning criticism. It's not their money. They have no skin in the game.
No.
So let's say they make a big mistake and they say we drop $5 billion on a battery plant and the thing blows up and goes bankrupt. The public servant doesn't get fired. He doesn't have to pay back the money. It doesn't come out of the equity in his house. Whereas entrepreneurs, they have skin in the game.
You miss due dates. Boom. You miss audit. Imagine that company misses their audits.
Skin in the game is hugely important. And a public servant, by definition, does not have equity. Skin in the game means equity.
Yes,
okay?
of course. Skin in the game.
Investment.
Yes.
Well, you can't have it because of conflict of interest laws. Yes. You cannot have an investment in a project that you are financing or regulating. That's an absolute no-no. So, I mean, to prevent corruption. Okay, but the idea, Champagne was bragging, and I like the man, I've never met him, but he was bragging there, we have determined that, we're going to build these battery plants, and we're going to be very successful. And I want to sidebar, but we're still on the same topic.
Yes.
Another reason why the manufacturing is doomed to fail.
Yes. And
I've been saying this for 20 years, because
we're not good at it.
2000, well, we're not only not good at it, we've got a very small market, 40 million people. Manufacturing requires huge economies of scale with hundreds of millions or billions of people to recover your capital investment. Okay? And I couldn't, when the government of Canada and the government of Quebec, back in around 2000 or 2001 or 2, something like that, decided, Bombardier, we are going to designate you as our guy to develop a commercial airliner to compete with Boeing and Airbus, okay? A wide-body jet plus 100 seats. Before that, they were making small RJs, and Boeing and Airbus were not in that space. And they just let them be because it wasn't their market, so you go and make your little RJs, okay? And then the government of Canada, under the Christian government, and Bombardier went to the, help us. We're going to compete with them. I was criticizing this in the media at the time, not because I was brilliant. I just said, look, guys, these two companies, Bombardier and Boeing and Airbus, are two of the biggest companies on the planet Earth. And Airbus at the time, who owned them? The European governments.
Yes.
And Boeing, 1/3 of their revenues, I looked it up, comes from the Pentagon. Because they're a huge
I was going to say, they
supplier.
don't make money without the government support.
So my point is, who on earth got the idea that the Americans and the Europeans were going to say to us, oh yes, Bombardier, you come into our markets and take a whole bunch of our customers, our market share away from our companies called Boeing and Airbus. I said, this is doomed to fail. I don't care how smart the engineers are in Bombardier. So what happened, fast forward 22 years later? That's exactly what happened, and this has been well documented. Airbus and Boeing went after them. They threw every block in the book, every possible delaying tactic, and they just tried to ruin and drive Bombardier into the ground. And they succeeded because they ended up exiting large wide-body airplanes, and they sold all their R&D that had been developed with billions and billions of dollars. They sold it to Airbus for some trivial amount of money. I think it was $10 million or something. They exited the business because the Europeans and the Americans were never going to allow them to come in.
There's no way.
It's the same argument I'm now making about the battery plants. Europe and China and America are the three superpowers, if I can call it that, of manufacturing. I don't care if it's planes or trains or cars.
Or toys even.
Or toys, whatever,
it is,
okay? Yeah. The idea when Champagne and Trudeau said, we're going to be cutting state-of-the-art battery plants, and we're going to buy our way into the supply chain, and we're going to recreate and create a supply chain competencies in Canada in battery plants. I was saying in the interviews, are you guys insane? Do you really think the Americans are going to say, oh yes, come on into our country and take jobs away from our workers in Ohio? We think that's really cool because we like you Canadians. You're nice guys, aren't you? What a pile of crap. And the Europeans, can you imagine the Europeans saying that? Oh, come on over and take jobs from Germany.
No shot.
And take jobs away from our battery plants in Italy. Well, the French and the Italians and the Germans were never going to let that happen. So we went and squandered $50 billion to try to build in an area we have no competencies. We've never had a competitive advantage in manufacturing. To take on who? China, Europe, and the United States. Are we dreaming? We're 40 million people. China's 1.3 billion. Europe is 500 million people. America's 340 million people. And we're going to beat all three of them up. With 40 million people and a GDP of 2.5 trillion. The US is 30 trillion. China's 19 trillion. Europe is 18 trillion. We're 2.5, and we're going to beat them up. I mean, you got to be on drugs to believe this. You got to be smoking something. I mean, when I say it like this, it's so absurd when I put it that crudely and crassly and bluntly, okay? And yet, I didn't hear one person in the government. They were all, high-fiving and slapping each other on the back, and isn't this clever, and aren't we smart? Look what we've done. We're going to be the industry of the tomorrow. We're going to have EV, battery plants. And nobody asked the obvious question. What do you think the Americans are going to do? Do you think they're going to say, oh, yes, come on in, Canada. We love you guys. And then Trump got elected.
Bombardier should be a case study for them to follow, right?
No kidding.
Yeah.
And anybody who thinks that Trump is going to let us send our government-funded, subsidized batteries, electric batteries, into Ohio to take jobs from the workers in Ohio that voted for Donald Trump,
no way.
They are not. They're not living in the real world. Okay, they're not.
No.
They're not going to. We should kill those battery plants so goddamn quick, pardon my language, and just say, guys, this is not who we are. We're not going to have a snowball's chance in hell. And I'm not saying throw up our hands and do nothing. For 25 years, the federal and the provincial government, the government of Ontario and the federal government has talked about ring of fire for critical minerals. There is probably trillions, if not, certainly hundreds of billions of critical minerals in the ring of fire. We haven't even built a road in 25 years. We're still talking about it after a quarter of a century.
What a joke.
What a joke. It's on our nose. I mean, these critical minerals, we got trees. Listen, I'm going now because you got me going because it just drives me crazy.
Yeah.
We have environmentalists and government policy. Oh, we got to designate whole huge forests in BC because the trees are virgin. What the hell is a virgin tree? I thought all trees were virgin. If you want to start talking and pointing to the virgin forest, I mean, they actually talk, oh no, this is old growth virgin. Well,
show me what a non-virgin tree looks like.
I didn't know what a non-virgin tree was. The tree dies, there's a forest fire, and new trees grow back, and they're virgin trees.
There's a married tree.
So, and here we are, the Americans want our trees, China wants our trees, Japan wants our trees, and we're saying, oh, no, we can't cut down on this mountain, we can't cut down on that mountain. It's a renewable resource, guys. The damn tree grows back if you cut it down. It may take a few years, I acknowledge that. So, okay, get some smart biologists in the agricultural research R&D laboratory to work on genes and gene splitting or whatever they call it, you know what I mean, to make the trees grow faster.
Yeah.
Genetically modified trees, okay. Sure. But my point is, it's a renewable resource. And so we've got all these restrictions now. My students have actually studied some of the big timber companies, and they said their biggest complaint is they can't get enough permits because the allowable cut, and that's what it's called, it's a permit, it's a quota. And their allowable cut to cut down trees is radically restricted by the BC government and the government of Canada. Wow. And again, here we are shooting ourselves in the foot as if we're going to export battery plants to the States. They're not going to let us. Or we're going to export Bombardier airplanes. They're not going to let us. Anything that's manufacturing, they are not going to let us go and take their jobs from Ohio or Illinois or Michigan.
The Bible states.
They're not. Whatever. They're just not going to let them. It's not going to happen. So we should be, but everybody wants our resources. I don't mean just China. And I think we should do a deal with China, not on sensitive technologies, because that'll drive the Americans crazy and they'll come after us. But the Americans aren't going to complain if we start selling them lots and do a trade agreement for resources, for trees and liquefied natural gas and fish and wheat and canola
that's what we should be doing with China, not anything sensitive high tech that's going to annoy and alienate
But did
the
they
US.
just tariff 100% our
They did because we put a tariff on their EVs
many years ago?
a year ago.
Oh, okay.
If I was, of course, what I'm about to say is really radical, and I mean that. In a perfect world, we would just say to the auto industry, no more subsidies for you. You're on your own, and if you sink, you sink, and if you swim, you swim.
Yeah.
Before someone says that's a crazy, crazy idea, Australia in 2017 did exactly that.
And look,
they were pouring billions and billions and billions into trying to keep the Australian auto manufacturing industry alive, and finally the government said, that's it. We don't have any competitive advantage in making cars. We're going to pull the plug. And you know what happened? GM and all the car plants pulled out.
Yep.
And the Australians said, we are going to import our cars from all the countries that make cars.
Yep.
And there were all kinds of people saying, oh my God, Australia's doomed. Did you know that Australia's standard of living, GDP per capita, is larger today than it was when they exited the auto industry? In fact, they surpassed Canada. Mm-hmm. So we are pouring money down
right
the
after
drain.
Switzerland, I think.
Yeah, well, Australia is doing
3.
two things. Services like Canada and the other high-income countries. And guess what the other one is? Resources. They've got resources coming out there, yin-yang too. Yeah. Only they're developing them. They're not blocking them. And so,
why don't we just copy Australia?
That's what we should be doing. Yeah. That's really what I'm saying. So anyone who says, this is too crazy, Ian Lee, we can't do this. Let's just copy Australia. They did it, and it's working.
You know who I feel really bad for right now is the opposition, Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
Because right now with this whole, because he was doing really well in the polls.
Yes.
Versus our old prime minister.
Yeah.
And when Trump when Trump became president again, he imposed the tariffs, and that basically stirred a pot. And now we have a new champion now, and then it's too bad all the work he was doing.
And I say too bad because Poilievre, very quickly, Carney is still, thus far, supporting those decisions by the Trudeau government to restrict the development of resources. He's kept the cap on production of oil and gas. He said he's not going to rescind the no pipeline bill. He's not going to rescind the tanker ban bill.
This is Carney?
This is Carney in this campaign.
He said he's not.
He's going to keep those Trudeau restrictions
on our resources,
on our resource development.
So all the energy that everybody wants, he's saying, no way.
No way. So what he's doing is he's handicapping us as we go forward. He's handicapping us because we're not, I keep saying it over and over.
Who does this benefit?
We're not going to sell cars. So what he's doing is that this is the left agenda, the green agenda. Let's put it that way.
Wow, that's bad.
Because Carney, you see, is very, very green. His wife is even more green.
Yeah.
And that's why I said I think he's going to face a very, very, assuming he is elected in the election, I think he's going to be facing a very, very, very critical moment in the near future in this country. Okay, do we continue to suppress resource development given that the American government with tariffs is not going to allow our auto industry to get bigger? That's very clear.
Yeah, it's time to put a dollar in it. We shouldn't penny in it. Yeah.
Do we take the restrictions off of resources and pivot that way? Or do we keep on pretending and selling snake oil to the public and telling them, oh, no, we're going to sell cars to the world or manufacture goods? No, we're not. So he's got a very tough decision. If he is elected as prime minister, he's going to have to confront that. Even though the Liberal Party has been very anti-resource development for the last 10, 15 years, they're going to face a very tough choice. Because if they don't open it up, then we're going to continue to decline economically.
I kind of feel like, when you go to Europe and you go to like capitals like Paris or Rome or London, do you ever see like for sale signs downtown? You never see anything being sold. No. Nobody can afford anything in these cities. Yeah. And I feel like Canada, that's what's going to happen one day. You're going to never see for sale signs. It's all going to be owned by but whoever's there first.
Well, our standard of living is declining.
Yeah, it's becoming unaffordable for the average first-time home buyer. Average age is now 38 years old.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
No, I know. And then on his housing plan, again, they have a bias. The Americans have a bias towards. The Canadians have a bias towards government solutions. Carney's plan to build the houses, the shortfall of $4 million, is a government crown corporation. Instead of saying, I want the private sector to build 4 million houses, they've been building the houses from the beginning of the country. And yet he's looking to government as the solution to build to address this huge gap of housing.
Government should do it.
And the government should not be doing it because they don't have the capital, they don't have the expertise, and the private sector has been doing this for 150 years, and they're very good at it, by the way.
Mm-hmm. I would never trust the government to develop a property. It would take too long. It would go over budget. It would. I think Lansdowne. So Lansdowne is in the capital. Okay, just letting people know in the glebe, so near where you live.
Yep.
And I think they put like 2 water fountains. To the government, the city municipality put 2.
Right.
I think it was $250,000 for 2 water fountains to drink out of.
Yeah.
That nobody in the private sector would blow $250,000. I can buy. I could go to college rents, and I don't know. I would not recommend them to take care of that. I don't think we'd recover from that if they start doing that.
I agree.
Yeah, that would be the one I would be really worried about. But great to have you on. I know we're at your time.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
I saw you look at that time, so thank you so much.
I got to another interview.
Yeah.
But, listen, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.